Hi, fourth graders. So today we are going to be diving into lesson 8, which talks about slavery and the Americans. Now, in lesson 6, we learned that people from Europe wanted to go and find new land. And eventually, instead of finding new land where they thought was Asia, they found it in North America. And so settlements started coming over. They saw that American Indians were already living there. And, there was some fighting that went on during that time. And eventually, people started settling over in North America. Only a couple of settlements started doing that. And I talked about how tobacco was a crop that a lot of people were getting rich on. And when you start making more things, more products of things, you need more people to help you handle it. And people were trying to figure out a cheap way to hire people but still make a lot of money. And unfortunately, slavery started happening in North America. And in this chapter, you're going to learn a little bit about how slavery happened and started and what was the impact on these people, these Africans that had to do slavery. So, slavery started happening in North America, and in this chapter, you're going to learn about how capturing and trading slaves changed the lives of these West Africans, and these people were forced into the American colonies and treated very unfairly. So, let's go to the next page. So, life in West Africa in the 1500s. So, in the last lesson that I taught, we talked about Christopher Columbus and how he came in like 1492. So, and then all that stuff started happening where people were going over to North America and settling and stuff. So now we're in the 1500s and we're looking at the lives in the West Africans in the 1500s. And people in West Africa lived as like farmers and traders. They had a lot going on. They told stories. They were living kind of a normal life back then. And Europeans started traveling to West Africa. And these Europeans wanted to trade with the people in West Africa. And they were like, yeah, we trade with people, that's fine. But unfortunately, they didn't just trade things, they started trading people. And this, in the next page, you're going to find out that this was kind of a common thing that people were already doing in West Africa. And when the Europeans and West Africans started trading, this became known as the slave trade. So this was the business of capturing, transporting, and selling people as slaves in exchange for goods. So this is what Europeans and West Africans were doing. They were doing slave trade. They, instead of trading things, they were literally trading people. So let's move on to the next page. So this talks about Europe and the slave trade. So an important thing to understand is that slavery had existed in West Africa before the Europeans started trading with them. The slavery we know of is that slaves have no rights. So what you probably learned is the slaves like in North America that we had no rights. They were not paid for anything. They were just forced into work and they had no rights. But in West Africa, they had like a different point of view about slavery before the Europeans came. They would make people slaves if they were found guilty of crimes, but these people still had a little bit of rights. They could live in their village and they could even own land, and some even earn money. So that's way different than what you're going to find out later in the chapter that Europeans did to these West Africans. And when Europeans started trading, like I said, it was just completely different. And many people, like I said in the beginning of this video, needed cheap labor. When I say cheap labor, I mean cheap workers. And Europeans thought, well, the way to get cheap labor or cheap workers is to actually start trading people and kind of owning them. And so they could come work for them. And, some Europeans would give leaders in West African things so they could sell some of their people. But some leaders were forced to sell people to buy guns to protect themselves and other groups. So some leaders were saying, hey, like, this is not okay. But some leaders were actually forced into selling their people because they needed to protect themselves and their families. So it was a hot mess, I would say, of people trying to win each other over and try to get slavery a big thing. And Europeans were very persuasive and they're just very persuasive. And so that leads us into West Africans and the slave trade. So not everyone in West Africa agreed with the slave trade with Europeans, like I was saying. Some people thought this was bad, and they thought they shouldn't do it, while others enjoyed getting rich by trading slaves. So some people took a stand and said, hey, this slavery thing is not cool. I do not want to do this. But it became a rough situation. Some people refused to trade, but Europeans and West African tribes did not like this. So some Europeans and some tribes that were already doing the slave trade, they were like, no, like you need to start trading. This is not okay. So some people would even start fights with them. So these Europeans and these tribes would even try to fight with them and start a war with these people who did not want to do slave trade. And eventually some people would have to give in because of the things that Europeans try to bribe them, they try to threaten them with war, they try to fight with them. So it was a messy situation. So some people tried to stop this or not be a part of it, but they had to sometimes because they were forced into it. So this is all we're going to do for today. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk about how these slaves were treated going over to North America.